Great, looks like we are live. Talaya, I don't really see your screen on the live stream, so maybe if you want to show your video, we can see if that works. Okay. Oop. Thanks so much for everybody who's joining us here tonight. We're going to just wait one more minute while a few more people log on, and then we'll get started. All right, it is 6:01, so I guess we'll kick it off. I see all of our faces on our YouTube channel now, so we're good to go. I'll just do a super quick intro and then I'll hand it off. My name is Emma. I'm the director of Union Hall. We're hosting this awesome event here tonight. Union Hall is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We support emerging artists in the Denver area and beyond. And we showcase exhibitions as well as interdisciplinary events and programming. Our current show, which is what brings us all here tonight, is called Matter is Minimum. And it's up through next Saturday, August 28th. So if you haven't had a chance to see it yet and you'd still like to, there's still some time. We're open Wednesdays through Saturdays, 12 to 6 p.m. And you can make a reservation through our website and find out more information there. Your reservation is not required, but you can make it through there. It's www.unionhalldenver.org. I'd also just like to give a quick shout out to our generous sponsors for this exhibition and all the surrounding programming. And that's the Colorado Community Foundation, as well as Carolyn and Ron Royce. Thank you all so much for your support. Also, just a reminder to everybody, there will be a Q&A portion at the end of this. So if you'd like to ask some questions, feel free to leave them in the YouTube channel in the little chat box there, and we will get to them towards the end of the talk. So yeah, I will hand it off now to our wonderful moderator, Lex, and see you all soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. I'm Lex. I use they, them pronouns. I will be your moderator tonight. I'm from the beautiful city of brotherly love, North Philly, recent transplant here to Denver. I bring you greetings as a representative of the inaugural Black Pride Denver here, our committee. We are so honored to be a part of this. I'm honored to be your moderator. I just want to bring it to our, excuse me, I just want to bring it to our panelists now for them to introduce themselves. I don't want to take up any more time. I'm super excited about tonight. I'm excited for all of y'all who are joining us. Summer and Shammai, go ahead and introduce yourselves. Tell us a bit about your process, and we'll get started with some questions.
Cool. Thank you so much for the introduction, Lex. I think Summer will start with kind of talking about the project, but just to start off, my name is Shammai. I use she, her pronouns. I am the facilitator of the project. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Summer. I use she, her, hers pronouns as well. I am the photographer, videographer, and also co-creator of They Rage. And I'll let Talaya introduce themselves and then go into where They Rage came from and all of that.
Awesome. I'm Talaya Banks. I use she and they pronouns. Yeah.
Okay, so quickly to go over the project, They Rage is a photo and interview series that documents the process of relating to anger within a controlled environment in order to document an uncontrolled experience. So each session begins with an interview. In this interview, participants explain their experience with anger, the definition of the emotion itself, and how they feel society relates to this expression. Those are kind of the main questions, and then we definitely go in a little bit further within each interview as well. After that first interview process, we then introduce the space to the participants and just kind of take a step back and let the participants express whatever they wish to, often rage through their body and also through writing and different mediums. And then towards the end of the experience, we do a closing interview in which we go through a couple of breathing exercises and then talk about the experience that they just had. So that's kind of the grand overall structure of what we do. We encourage participants to express themselves openly without fear of judgment or shame. In the time of one photo shoot, we are witness to the process of people immersing themselves in this conversation with anger. And I'll pass it on to Shammai.
Thank you, Summer. So the series that's up right now for our exhibition at Union Hall is called Matter is Minimum. This name came to be, and it has kind of like a dual meaning for us. One being that the participants that we got to be a part of our project was a response to a lot of what was happening surrounding Black Lives Matter and protesting and just racial and social injustice. And so Matter is Minimum was something that was kind of on some protesting signs of asking for people's lives to matter is the most minimum thing we can do. And then I think in terms of the project, I think for us, the physical expression of anger is the smallest thing, right? Because yes, that matters, but anger is so much more than just a physical expression. And so I think that that's kind of where that project name comes from for the show. And then I think before we get started, Summer and I wanted to share a quote from Audre Lorde. So I'll read that now. Most of all, I think we fear the visibility without which we cannot truly live. And that visibility, which makes us most vulnerable, is that which also is the source of our greatest strength.
Shay, thank you. While we're still on the process side, Talaya, I would love to hear about the process from you as a participant. You can kind of, what was that like? What did that look like? What were you kind of brought into?
For sure. Even at the beginning, I had seen these pictures of some of my peers and my community members who had did like the first cohort, if you will, or season of They Rage. And I was like, wow, they're like breaking shit and smashing shit. And like, that seems like a great way to put anger. And so I reached out and I was like, yeah, I'll do it whenever, whatever. I would love to do it. And so then the day came and I'm like, okay, here we go. But when I got there, I was like, I wonder if they're just going to be like, get angry and then I start smashing stuff, or if there would be like a whole process. And I think that was the best part, that there was like an intentional process of like a welcoming and a landing space to see, like, for even myself to sort out my anger and be like, oh yeah, these are my current thoughts on anger. This is what I'm currently angry at. This is how it's sitting in my body. And then to like play my like rage music and get to break things was one of the most liberating feelings that I have for anger in my body, which is, and then to afterwards realize how powerful it is to have a strong space to express anger. So sometimes now I get mad and I'm like, oh yeah, there's these raging pictures of me somewhere in the universe of me being angry, and it brings me a lot of joy.
Ashe, thank you. Thank you. Summer and Shammai, how are the participants chosen? And how are they chosen in each, do you go by sessions or quarters or cohorts?
So the participants for this show specifically were chosen, and that was like I said before, it was this call to action to give Black and Brown women and non-binary people a space to express themselves in a way that was safe, given that at the time period, there were not a lot of safe spaces for Black and Brown people to express themselves and feel that they would not be, called out, or just not be able to do that in a way that didn't receive some sort of backlash. They rage in general, for the different photo shoots that we've done has been both a Facebook reach out, and then from there kind of has grown into people who have participated and really connected with the process. We then ask them if there's anyone that they can think of that would relate to it. So I think that it's kind of like a word of mouth situation. Both Summer and I will reach out on our Instagram and other social medias, but really I think for us, it's important that people know sort of about the process and feel that they can open themselves up to it. And I think that for this exhibition, it was important for us to give this space to anyone who felt that they just needed to sit and live in and be with their anger. And so, yeah.
Summer, were you going to add something to that?
Yeah, I would say, well, I didn't want to after that ending because I thought it was quite beautiful. But before, I was going to add that on earlier sessions, also just random people we met in the streets who we'd talk about the project with, and a lot of, I think, women and non-binary folks in particular, as soon as they hear it, a lot of response is, I want to do that. I have been looking for a space where I can do that. And that's also where the project really came from too, is this question of what would happen if you create that space, right? What would happen if you create a space in which there isn't judgment and you're not hurting anyone and you can actually just let that go physically. And so I think, yeah, when people hear it, it's an excitement that comes up, which is pretty fun, and also makes it not very hard to find participants.
Yeah, sweet. So this next question, I would love to hear from all three of you, honestly. So you have this idea that's formed, you have your questions, you need to get participants, you need space, you need a physical space, right? But also need to kind of create a space in which folks feel safe enough or brave enough to be able to kind of express their emotions. Talk to us about the collaboration of that, right? The collaboration with each other, down to the nitty gritty of finding the space to do this.
So I would say that for probably all of us on this panel, community is a really important thing, and a lot of things can't get done without the community around us, and opportunities and spaces, open up by asking people for help. And I think that for some of the first photo shoots, it was one of Summer's very good friends and kind of mentors that opened that space up. And then for the last set of photo shoots that are up in the gallery, that was another community art space that it was COVID. They usually did shows. It was at Rhinoceropolis, and we were just like, hey, what are you doing with the space? Can we use it? And they're like, yes, please, give some life to this thing that no one can really take advantage of or be a part of because we can't gather. So that's kind of how we were able to get the space. And yeah, I think someone else can go in.
Yeah, I'll go next. And then in terms of just facilitating that space, Shammai, you can jump in at any point as the main facilitator for this, for Matters Minimum specifically. But having the structure is really helpful to then be able to take it where the individual goes and be able to follow them there. So as a documentarian, this idea of controlled space so that you can respond to an uncontrolled response, it's creating a space that feels safe and held. We are there as a facilitator to make sure that the participant does not harm themselves physically, to make sure to hold the space so that the participant feels seen, but also not judged. So there's a lot of work that Shammai and I do, kind of just holding the space in general. And I will say that the way that we structured it, choice and agency is a big and core piece of the way that we structure things. So right from the get-go, there's a model release form that we created in which the participants have every right to tell us within 24 hours, hey, I do not want these photos to ever see the light of day. And that's really important for this kind of work, I think, for people to have that option. And so at that point, we would then send them the photos and delete it on our end. So it's 100% their work. And I think that that's really, really important when you're doing collaborative work, to make sure that everyone feels that they have agency. And then past that point, it's also a conversation of understanding that this work is pretty vulnerable, and just being very respectful of that. And I think having that agency from the get-go helped to establish that kind of trust that was needed in order to take these kind of photos. But Talaya, how did you feel about it?
Absolutely. I love the idea, I love the naming of the collaboration between us. Because I really love the idea of like rage is like a journey. And so like I can say here and say I am angry, but to be embodied in anger and is a completely different thing. And so to even have the lead into anger and not just be like, become angry, like let's sit with it. Let's like be meaningful about it and give rage. It's almost like giving this emotion that we usually hide, like this, giving it space. And we're saying, hey, how are you? Come out, like see some light, break some shit. I know you want to do these things. And so like unlimiting it. And I remember one of the first things that Summer and Shammai said to me before we got started was like, don't worry about us. Like we can take care of ourselves. Like if something comes flying, we can move. Like you do not have to think about us in the space. Like I will move and journey with you. And so there's a big thing on, I think, collaboration that comes with honesty and truth and committing to the whole journey of both theory and practice and embodiment that I love and honor about the collaboration with Summer and Shammai in that space. Yeah.
I think also to go off of honesty, I think that like in a normal journalism setting, you're asking questions that you are not like divulging the answers to with whoever you're asking those questions. And I think that at least for me as a facilitator and making the space something that's comfortable and vulnerable is to also like place that vulnerability on myself. If I couldn't answer that question in front of a participant, then like, why am I there, you know? So I think that in order to make it a collaborative space, it's the conversation is not one-sided. And so we're asking these 4 core questions about anger. But I think that in some ways adding into how, you know, we feel about it, or that we would piggyback off of that idea, or I've never thought of it that way. Just, I think in order to make it a space where there's give and take on both ends is very important for us. So, yeah.
That really, it leads me into the next question. But before I do that, I wanted to know if Summer or Shammai, if either of you could repeat the 4 questions again. I know they were said at the beginning, but the teacher in me is like, let's get some repetition in here so that way folks know what we're asking.
Totally. The questions that Summer and I will ask are, how would you define anger? How has it shown up in your life? What are key moments that are connected to your process of release today? And how does society think about your anger? And I think that that 3rd question is probably the most pivotal one, because it's like, okay, anger as this kind of abstract idea, and then now tying it back into like, okay, I decided to be a part of this project for X reasons, and now I can start thinking about what those reasons are.
I love that. Thank you for repeating those. I got a chance to visit the exhibit on Wednesday, and within the first 10 seconds, I was crying. And I said to the group earlier, I was like, I don't even like to cry in front of my cat, right? And so I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting to come and to see and observe, but not to be brought in, right? And so the question I have is, how do you go from those 4 questions to providing a space where folks come and look at pictures and say, I know that emotion, I see that, I have that, I see that in me?
I think that is kind of the ultimate question, honestly. I think that when you look at things on paper and you see those 4 questions and then you see the photos, you're like, wait a minute, something happened in between and I don't know what it was. And I think that, and this is a conversation I think that I've had a few different times, and it's in relation to anger and also the photos there, is that it's something that we're all carrying all the time. And so, like Talaya was saying, like, hey, will you come out for just a minute? And then once it's out, I think is kind of how those photos come to be. I think that creating space for it, once the space is there, it will flourish in some way. But I would love to hear how Talaya honestly feels about that, of like that process of having the interview and then going into the space.
Yeah, there's so many different things are popping up for me. First things first, I think when you give rage space to be beautiful, it can be beautiful in these ways that build resonance. Of like, sometimes I saw other people's pictures and I'd be like, I have that in me. And so I think it's about saying like, I am committed to journeying through my rage. I was committed to journeying through my rage there. And I was going to say something else, and my refrigerator started making the sounds. But there's something about taking the pictures and being like, I am actively angry, and then revisiting it a year later and be like, wow, I was angry and I had that rage, and I can pinpoint to you every place I had rage and what rage was showing up that day. And to like check in a year later and be like, okay, cool, we've handled and resolved some of these things. Some of these things have not, and it's calling attention to and seeing where to give more space to. I don't know if I'm still answering the question, but I think there's something magical when you give space to the emotions that we hide, or that are like stuffed down by society, or like, I want you to cry more, Lex. I want you to cry in front of your cat. I'm like, what do you mean? I was crying just hearing this collaboration. So I invite you into more of that, and inviting like this larger vulnerability to be shown, because I think that's like the loud vulnerability of this is really the beautiful part in the transition. And I think that speaks louder than I can actually. I don't know.
I want to go off of that. I want to go off like that was, you said, give rage space to be beautiful. And just the thing that I'm just seeing is like, y'all brought folks in initially to talk about, you know, kind of the bloody summer we had of 2020, right? And out there getting our asses kicked and all of that, but it obviously didn't stay there, right? And so talk to us about that, and or Shammai, wherever you were going to go, please take it wherever that was going to go.
Yeah, I think that kind of connects the two. Actually, go ahead, Summer. Oh, okay. I think that kind of connects the two. Part of what Talaya said and part of the question is that one thing that I think I've noticed in talking to different people who have seen the show and talking to the gallery manager about people who've seen it is when you look at these photos and you can connect to what that emotion means. Like the first thing that I ask is like, what are these people carrying? Like if Talaya knows what they were feeling in that photo and I know what I feel when I see that because I've had it, like what does that mean? And kind of that collective anger that we all experience. And then I think kind of going into the collective nature of anger. And this could be a total sidestep from that conversation, but like even, you know, people getting their asses kicked in the street for protesting about their lives and kind of jumping from anger being about racial injustice into anger about my life is something that was interesting about documenting everyone's experience for this show. Was that what brought everyone there was, oh, okay, this injustice and like this fighting for meaningfulness of my existence is why I'm here. But then my anger is related and rooted in so many other things. And I think that there's something about the anger connected to Blackness and or femininity or sexuality and gender that we carry every day, right? So like that's something that I know. But then there's the angers of the everyday, the interactions, the relationships that we have with people. And I think that's kind of what it turned into for a lot of people. And so it was interesting that there's this point to jump off into everybody's kind of angry. I don't know how to say that in a better way. Like we all have a reason to be and a reason to express it. So
yeah, and I will say that there was definitely a trend with every single person who participated and did this project. And I would say, Talaya, it took you probably the least amount of time to get to the point that I'm about to describe, because you were there the moment you stepped into the space, I think. But for a lot of people at the beginning, a lot of people described it as acting anger out. There was this feeling of, okay, I'm physically going to be showing this anger. So in a way, I am acting anger for Shammai and myself, for us, because we want photos of anger, right? Like that's kind of the first feeling, the way that people are in this space potentially. And then it gets to a point where that idea and that thinking about it goes away because your body is taken over. And at that point, it's where I'd like to say like the true anger comes out. There's this very honest emotion that hits. And Shammai and I would always look at each other because it's very obvious when that happens. And that's usually from that point on, those are the photos that we took, right? So before that, it was just getting people used to the space, getting people used to the camera. There's this kind of play. There's this, there's pretending almost in a sense. And then there's boom, this is the reality. This is it. And this is where we are at. And I think why we're able to get there is because no one in that space is scared of those emotions, right? Like no one in that space, none of us are going to be scared of that anger. And I think it becomes known once you're in the space for enough time, you then trust it. You trust that we're not going to back down. We're not going to be fearful. We're not going to stop it. We're not going to judge it. It's very, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just it like hits at a certain point, and then it does that relate at all, Talaya, to your experience?
I know what you're talking about. Absolutely. I remember, I would love to, outside of this, sit down with you all and go through a timeline of it. But if I'm remembering correctly, I remember standing and like I was breathing, and I remember asking my anger, I was like, what expression do you need right now? And so I think starting with the self of like coming into my body and being like, all right, y'all, this is anger. This is anger's time to like have space. Shame and guilt, you all line up, you all are coming out too. But there's this moment when you're like, you get over the like, okay, I'm not going to hit them. The camera's fine. And you just keep throwing the plates or beating the bat. You keep beating the things with the bat and you're like, wow, this is, and I'm not in trouble. And you're like giving your inner child like this space to be like, am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to break something? Am I going to hurt someone? And after you answer all of those questions, no, it's like, all right, let's rage for real. And it's great and it's beautiful. And you're like, yeah. And then your heart is like beating faster than you can ever like even imagine. There's this picture of me going like this on my chest. And I was like, I think people think like I'm connecting to myself, but I'm literally holding my heart so it doesn't come out of my chest. And so it's a lot of just meeting all of those things you said, Summer, and then meeting the self and being like, okay.
Talaya, can I go off of that and ask you about vulnerability? Vulnerability of doing the work, what you were just kind of expressing to us, and also the vulnerability of seeing the pictures now. Will you talk to us about that process?
Of course. Vulnerability, when it's held and shaped correctly, can yield these transformative, beautiful experiences and spaces. And I would even love to hear from Summer and Shammai on facilitating this level of vulnerability. But it is crazy. It's crazy to see myself be vulnerable. Even like now, almost a year later, before I saw the pictures, I was ready to like hide in this cocoon and not be vulnerable. And then I saw it and I was like, oh wow, this is my invitation back in. And so vulnerability is not like easy or fun, and it's really uncomfortable. But when you lean into it and when you trust it to shape change, ultimately, it can time travel, it can bend, it can yield new truths and yield new realities because of that. And now we have like this representation in these photos of like angry Black women, and it means something else. And it doesn't mean the same thing as before. So there's something really beautiful and vulnerable about that for me. And then seeing it a year later is like being honest with myself on how I handled those angers after that space. And some of them I'm like, wow, I'm so proud of you. And some of them I'm like, let's circle back and support it.
Do either of you want to answer about the vulnerability of the project, doing the project with folks, and also seeing the pictures now and seeing the gallery?
I don't know. That was so beautiful, Talaya. I don't think I could say anything better than that. In terms of the vulnerability of putting work out here, most of my vulnerability had to do with just hoping that it would impact people, because all the participants put so much of themselves into this project. So my big thing was just kind of almost just trying to Shammai and I trying to put it together in a way that people really take the time and go into this space just okay with the big questions, right? So being okay to just sit with uncomfortable questions that come up and to not project a story or a narrative onto it, and to just be in the space and let the space impact them, because it's the experience of these incredible people being vulnerable. So that was the biggest thing for me, was okay, like we need to create a space in which it's obvious that you go into that space and you give it respect, and you sit with it. And then when you leave the space, have all those questions, try to answer them, go for it. But while you're in the space, it's really just like letting those questions be questions and sitting with the uncomfortability or the beauty, or vulnerability, I think, is very beautiful. I think rage and anger is also very beautiful. So that was kind of what I'd add on. Shammai?
Can I say one more thing? And I think there is something that happens when you're seeing it and you're almost asking yourself, like, what do I feel? And sometimes I look at the pictures and I'm like, I feel nothing. And I'm checking in with my numbness. And then sometimes I look at it and I feel like the rage. And really what I'm hearing other people have reactions to seeing the exhibit, or like people are texting me and letting me know what they think. It's really about how they're checking in with their own rage. I think I know. I think.
I'm glad that was the goal. Yay.
You're doing great, Summer.
But no, I'm glad to hear that, because that's how we wanted to frame it, right? Because there's this amazing vulnerability and this amazing honor to be able to photograph people this way. And then that comes with a grand responsibility to make sure that the space in which you show those images makes it so that the way that you're in that space is important, and makes it so whoever walks into that space realizes that they have to, not have to, but it is self-reflective in itself. And it's important. And that respect, I think, is just the underlying, you need to respect that space as soon as you walk into the space. So I'm really glad to hear that it's self-reflective and that people have been responding that way. That makes me really happy.
Shammai, were you gonna go?
I was, but I feel like Summer said it pretty well. I think the only addition to that, I mean, I think it is great that there is the self-reflective piece to not only like holding the vulnerability for everyone who participated, but also holding that for yourself and being able to like see yourself in these images. I think that is really kind of the focus of, at least for us, in trying to put the show together in a way that's like, yes, all of these people participated and allowed us to basically witness their processing. But I think that the hope of this project is then to relate that back to yourself. And are you able to let your cat witness your processing? Or like, are you able to, no, are you able to, understand and connect with the emotion that you see in these images? And I think that the thing that I asked when I go back and I see them all together in that initial like larger collage on the wall is like, what are they carrying? Like, what is the heaviness that everyone who is in this show, like, what is there? Like, I know that it's heavy. Like, I know that there is a ton of bricks that they're just like carrying around, and what does that mean for them? So yeah.
Shammai and Talaya, will you answer that question that Shammai just said so beautifully? What are they carrying? What did you see? What did you bring?
I was thinking about this question earlier today in a very different way, but I think there's something. Not, I think there's something. It is incredibly frustrating and tiring and a great vast of other emotions to realize you are in a world that in some ways like really does not care about you. The different level of dimensions in which it happens is really crazy, and you're like, all right, here we go, just another day trying to like navigate all of these things. It's super crazy. And then you have that on this like outer layer of Saturn, and then you go in a little bit, and then there's like, you get into your family stuff. And especially as like a queer person, during that time I was holding a lot of like trauma from my coming out that was really hard for me. And then being and yeah, you're just holding a whole lot of like life things, and you just realize like, oh, there's nothing. I almost would say there's something really special about like my rage, and then there's on this other hand that like rage just exists, and sometimes it becomes so like part of the, the thing. And I think I'm getting away from the question here, but a large part of it is asking, where is the rage in my body? So sometimes I get away from like, what am I holding, to like, where is it and how is it impacting my body and how do I need to move it? Because, and it just depends on how much space I can give to my anger. When I give it full space to be angry, we can get into it. But otherwise, like, I've been moving into how do I want to be angry, or how do I want to move this emotion, as a way of giving some of my other bodies some rest. Who knows?
Feel like the what are they carrying, especially because it's a show that is all Black and brown women and non-binary people of color, and the what are they carrying is to say like, I have the same piece of luggage that everybody else does and then some. And so I think that that is also a very interesting point for me of like, there's this, you know, there's a bag for your Blackness, there's a bag for like, you know, queerness, there's a bag for, you know, all of these other things. And I think that that is something that I see when I look at the photos, is not only are these people angry and do they have every right to be, but they're also in a world that doesn't accept their anger. They're in a world that doesn't accept their bodies as being, you know, beautiful, that doesn't accept their existence as being something that is important. And so I think that for me, when I ask that question of what are they carrying, is knowing that there's all these difficult questions that I just asked, and then a whole human life to go with it. And I think that like also a piece of like what are they carrying, and has come up in conversation with people who've seen the show and people who have participated in it, is like this idea of generational things as well. And so like what bags do you get passed down to you that you were like, where did this come from? Like, why do I have this? Why, like, and I think that that is also another piece of, you know, of anger and emotions, and you know, just what we're walking with every day. And I think that there's a point in the video of that Korea so eloquently says something about I see you, and to see someone is to know that they have a life, and to see someone is to know that they have experiences that are similar and different to your own, and that have caused us all to learn things, have caused us all to, you know, grow spite for things, have caused us to like be happy. But at the end of the day, like we all are carrying something, and those loads are heavy.
Talaya, did you want to say something else?
That was really beautifully said, Shammai.
It was. Felt like you just needed a moment to like take that in. Soon, folks who are watching, we are going to move to questions from folks in the audience. So if you have any questions, please make sure you are putting them in the chat on YouTube, and they will get to us over here. Thank you. What have y'all learned about rage as a category general, and about your rage specifically through this process?
I learned that rage unattended to becomes numbness, and it creates this secret little layer around the heart that makes vulnerability and radical honesty and everything and all of the spices that go with it hard to get to. Or I learned that about my rage. I don't know about everybody else's rage. I guess that's more my rage. I also learned that it's tender. It needs like delicate care. It needs intentional space, and how beneficial and helpful it is to have community to help hold that space. So I'm infinitely grateful for the ways in which I have this new definition of rage and witnessing of.
I think that's like the perfect, what you said was perfect. Rage unattended to becomes numbness. And I think that that was honestly the huge reason that I became a part of this project was because I was in the trial run of They Rage, and I I never had that point of connecting in because there was so much built up that the wall of numbness didn't allow me to access rage in the same way of expression. And so I think that through this process, like, I would probably say Summer and I are learning something new about it all the time, just in conversation with people, in witnessing other people like express themselves, in asking ourselves those same questions over and over again. But I think, yeah, that was honestly a very profound way of saying it. Rage unattended becomes numbness. And yeah, I think that really the biggest thing that I could say, and this is not quite answering the question, is that there's so many nuances to it that it shows up in so many different ways. And I think the biggest thing, and I think Summer can probably go into this a bit more, is that and it also ties to that title matters minimum, is that rage is not the physical expression. And I think that's like the biggest thing. And so that kind of ties into like our selection of photos, if you want to kind of go into that, Summer.
Yeah. And I will add on that with the numbness, also rage denied can become dangerous. So I think this denial of anger and this denial of rage that society, I would say at large, is the response by society to this emotion, fuels anger into a more dangerous place for a lot of people. And so that's another reason why the space is very curated to allow that to come up in a way that it doesn't harm anybody. And it's not surrounding that, it's surrounding what then is rage and anger here to teach us, and what does it carry with it? Because it's a very strong emotion, and it carries with it I think everything else. I look at rage as a very like a carrier. It brings forward this. Talaya, I believe you said this in your interview as well. It's your body's response to knowing something's not okay, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It's a second emotion. It's an emotion that like, it's an alarm system, if you will. I don't want to cut you off.
You didn't. I passed it on there for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, that rage is the alarm system, but then when you go behind the alarm system and you're checking in with yourselves and your bodies, and you're like, who is hurt? Who got hurt? The alarm system is going off. And there's a process there's an internal process and communication that has to happen when when you are even thinking about doing work with rage in a productive manner, in transforming it, in transmuting it, there has to be like a communication between ourselves.
Yeah, and to go off of what Shammai was saying, the reason why we picked the images we picked in the show is because we wanted to demonstrate where it then goes, right? We wanted that to be what was displayed. I think there was a lot of question as to, okay, well, why don't we see more women, non-binary folks in this show actually angry? Like, why don't we see that part of it? And we absolutely have those photos. And there may be a time and place to have those photos displayed, but for this, we wanted to go further and we wanted to illustrate where participants, and specifically these beautiful human beings who did this specific show, and where they went with it, because it was so impactful and so informative and honestly informational for everyone, I think, involved.
Did anyone else have anything on that?
I think kind of just going into the selection of photos, because I think that's important to talk about, and with the group of people that are in there, the show is not supposed to be like some kind of like trauma porn, I guess is what people call it, for like angry Black women, because that's not what it's about. And I think that like the showcase of photos is to show like there are these nuances and that anger shows up in different ways, and like to show a Black person breaking something or a brown person breaking something is not necessary to communicate the fact that like anger is rooted in so much more than like the physicality. So yeah.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Yeah, that feels, I think, as a, person coming to watch, right? That felt so safe, right? That it wasn't this display of, Black trauma porn or anything. It was so beautiful. It was very much these are the emotions that are behind this rage, right? Like you saw that. And so thank you for saying that. We do have some questions from folks. This one is for everyone that says, what was the most unexpected feeling or experience that came forward during the process of making the images or viewing the images in Matter is Minimal? The most unexpected feeling.
Yeah, I would say for me, just being in the space of facilitating the space would be kind of elation, feeling this at the end, this feeling of release and having participants describe their experience of feeling lighter. So whenever I heard that, it was I wasn't expecting how much that would come up. And whenever I heard that, it was really impactful.
I think for me, the feeling that was unexpected or like unanticipated for me was the feeling of being whole. And I think that I think it's more of like the full circle feeling of doing this process with everyone and holding space for them to release, and then having a space and then holding them in that space. I think that was really, there was just like this moment, I think, that one of the participants, Olivia, came in, and I was just like able to hug her and hold on to her for a little bit. And that just like, it just like made this quick moment of like gratitude for everyone who did it. But then I think gratitude for ourselves, for me and Summer, for being able to like make something that is impactful.
Absolutely. A few words come to mind. Or proud. Proud is one of them. I was really proud to leave because I felt really held and honored in my journey, and then proud of myself to commit to the journey and to give it space. And I really love what the release and the elation was really nice. So it's like this like relief and proud, and you almost feel really badass leaving that space. You're like, who's going to mess with me? Yeah.
I'll only answer this because this person wrote my name. I wasn't expecting to feel the levels of kinship that I felt just by looking at these photos. It was very much this connectedness, this like, yep, I know that, I have that, I've seen that, I've witnessed that, I've held space for that, right? And yeah, and I think that was the thing that got me, because I've never even met you in person, Talaya, right? And I've never met the other folks, and there was this like, there's this connectedness in us, and I see that here, and it drew it out of me, and so yeah. This question is for Summer and Shammai. It says, what parts of the project do you think honors the work of Audre Lorde's uses of anger the best? And that's from Kara or Karia White. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly.
Yeah, I'll quickly speak on that and then pass it on. I would say the importance of anger, the radicalness of anger. I felt every time I was in that space that there was some radical work being done, and that felt amazing. And just the forcefulness and power that comes with working with this emotion and not, and acknowledging it and seeing it. I'll start with that, and then whoever wants to delve off.
I think that there is a part of that speech that Lorde kind of like goes into detail about experiences of kind of being pushed out of spaces. And I think that in honoring that work, it's like doing the exact opposite. And I think that's important for the both of us, is not only like giving and or providing the space, but it's showing up to it. Like, this wouldn't work, or like this couldn't come to be if Summer and I weren't able to fully be in the space and like fully be there with people. So I think that in and of itself is like radical, like being able to be present. And so, yeah.
Can I add a thing, because I love uses of anger? There's a quote, or there's somewhere in there, page 129, where Audre Lorde is talking about how women of color and morally Black women have like grown up in a symphony of anger, and at the importance of being able to learn how to orchestrate it, So it doesn't kill you. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I walked away with, was like, how am I going to orchestrate my anger so it doesn't harm me and backfire within myself? That's what I'll do, Lord.
What page is that again? You're on mute, but I think you said 129.
I'm on mute. It is 129
Thank you.
below the page. It's much better than how I said it also.
That was great. And it leads us into this next question that says, when thinking of generational anger, what do you believe has been passed down to you, and how are you able to identify it? And that's from Shammai Mading.
Hi, Mom. That was for my mom. I think that, like, for me, when you think about like anger and just like generational, and I think that, like, because anger is not just like this raw feeling and has so many different facets to it, I think of like choices that have been made to curate a life. And I think that, like, that has, at least for me, I feel like a lot of choices have been made for the betterment of someone's life. And that is like acknowledging the society around you that like doesn't accept you. And so I think that it may not come out as anger, but I think that in asking questions and having conversations with people about the choices they've made, and being, I don't know, I think for me, it was like, there were things that were said so matter-of-factly that I was like, there's so much that goes into, you know, why you chose a specific husband, or why you decided to go to a specific school or live in these different neighborhoods or whatever. And so I think that, like, the generational aspects of racism and how that shows up in families, I think, is kind of what I think of, without alluding to like the specific stories. But yeah.
I think for me, it manifested generationally as a pretty poisonous way of relating to one another, and to a point that drove my mother away from her family, and into a pretty unstable world that then she didn't have support in, which then in turn very much impacted the way that I grew up. And so I think for the most part, it drove her away, even though she was the one to always teach me how important it was to acknowledge anger. So I really got that lesson through her in a good way, but unfortunately through her like pretty core pain that came from it.
What I will say about generational anger, I'm interested in defining generational anger, and I think that would be a great like subcategory of anger. And really for me, it's and mine is almost I don't know, like my mom has an Aries and Mars that is hot and can fire off really large, like really big, has a Leo rising, very like explosive in the ways in which she shows anger, which when I'm not receiving it, I'm like, wow, I love that my mom is comfortable in her anger to share it. But then on the receiving end of some of those things, it made it so that I didn't know how to place my anger, or that if my anger showed up, it would get in trouble. So it was really about turning like this oil and water and making like something, sometimes a salad dressing out of it, but like most of the time it was like trying to figure out where can I fit my anger. And it wasn't until I was old enough, like 22 in undergrad, and was like, I cuss so bad. And you haven't heard me cuss, and like I started cussing, and I was like, this is a good way to put anger. This is a good way for my anger to start making space. But it's not until now that I've recently started sharing my anger with my mother. So I don't know. I would love to hear more on what you think on the generational anger. To your mom, Shammai, for sure.
I feel like that's gonna have to be like a whole other conversation, but I'll give you the bullet pointed list.
Thank y'all for answering that. That was a pretty vulnerable question, but it was a great one. So, one that kind of ties into what you were saying, Talaya, is, and this is from Daniel McCary. What do you feel like we can do on a day-to-day to make space for our anger and the rage that needs to be felt and heard? What can we do to make those feelings feel safe?
For me, I talk about, in my own work, I talk a lot about having a grief practice, but even a rage practice is good. And like for me, a rage practice could be I have, or in my grief practice, I would say, because that's another emotion that comes with anger. Um, it is me listening to Jasmine Sullivan's Tiny Desk and like singing it out to the top of my lungs by myself in the shower or in the car, and having a good cup of tea. And usually somewhere between there, I feel satisfied. Or even, I love crayons, and being able to just scribble on paper on crayons is like one of my jam. But really just building a toolbox of things that satisfy your anger, that says like, this is good, this is a good practice. And so that by having this toolbox, my anger doesn't always need these like grandiose situations. They're like, all right, we've been practicing, we've been getting expression pretty regularly, so there's no need to explode. Is my best attempt and practice at it now.
Leah, I love that. And to add on to that as well, I think also kind of setting yourself up to like giving yourself a guide as to how to react when different anger comes up. So taking the time when anger comes up to acknowledge it. Okay, I'm angry. Why is this anger coming up? Am I in immediate danger? Is this a warning that I'm in immediate danger and that I need to act on this forcefully? Or is it something that I need in my setting to check now and then, reapproach later? And I think also setting, like just having a game plan too of how are you going to deal with this emotion, or how do you want to deal with this emotion in the future, helps in the moment to be like, okay, I previously said that when this type of anger comes up, this is how I want to then meet that anger and move forward. And knowing that hopefully you go back to that, and then, it can tell you the information that it needs to tell you in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I also think that something that I noticed when just like doing this project and having different people participate and them having the agency to do whatever they want in the space is that there's always, not always, but there's oftentimes this moment where people move into something that's comfortable and that has been practiced before. And so for, some participants, their way of processing in their day-to-day life is, I'm going to go on a drive and I'm going to scream at the top of my lungs. And so when they're in the space, they do that, and that just like jumps them into this mindset. But I think that like for other participants, that was writing things down and just sitting with that feeling and being able to, write and not think about what they're writing and just let that flow. And I think for, other people, that was punching a pillow and screaming into that pillow. And I think that what's interesting about the project and the process that we go through is that, yes, there's like this whole assortment of things that people don't have access to in their regular day-to-day life, but then there's also these other things that are accessible, and some people have had practice with and some people haven't. And so it's interesting talking to people in that like kind of cool down session of, well, what do you want to take from this? And for some people, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that I could just write and that would be helpful. Or I didn't realize that, just vocalizing in the form of screaming was the thing that really did it for me. And so I think that the day-to-day and hearing it and feeling it for yourself is just like getting those kinds of moments in. It doesn't have to, I guess, be always this grandiose experience.
I love that. Thank y'all for those tools, actionable items. Priya asked, what does it feel like to let your anger settle and be? Does the stillness bring you to movement or something else?
This is a good question, Korea. This is a really good question. Hey girl, what does it feel like to let your anger settle and be? The words I have now are like, or the conversation I want to open up to is like, when anger settle and does it become stagnant? And if you don't move anger within a certain timeline, does it transition into, does it just become part of how you like coexist and do your daily routine? So what does it feel like to let your anger settle and be? Anger sitting in my body does not feel good to me. But also sometimes I'm just like, I don't have capacity to deal with it. And so I'll send it to the hips. But so subconsciously, that's what I'll do. But consciously, when I want to proactively care about my anger, I think this is a touchy situation and I don't think I'm unwebbing it well. But there's something about being fed up with the anger's stagnant expression or manifestation that does bring me to movement. That says, or another thing I like to think of, where's the energy leak? Where are my energy leaks? And so like, it feels like when I do not bring movement to my anger, it just kind of becomes an energy leak that I become unconscious about. I don't know, y'all. What do you all think? Am I making sense?
I think you're definitely making sense. And I also feel like this is one of those really great questions that doesn't have an answer and can be answered in so many ways. I think the like visual metaphor that I think of like settling is like anger is like, this dust storm around you that in some ways can cloud your vision, and letting it settle is having that clarity. And so I think stillness can bring you into movement because you can see where you're going and you can like articulate that. And I think that like, there's that the phrase seeing red, I think, for anger, right? And so it's like, I think that clarity removes the red away, and it's like, okay, now I can like pinpoint all those areas that were that caused that. And now I think the movement is, do I decide to like move towards this thing and try and move it out of the way, or do I turn around and like view something else? So I think yes and no is my answer.
I really love the ability to like step back and gain different sorts of clarity in the stillness. I retract what I said. I really love that.
Yeah, I think just as much as it's important for us to feel seen, in a way, anger kind of has the same thing, if that makes sense. Like are you letting anger settle and not acknowledging that it's there? So is it sedentary and stuck? Or are you letting it settle and acknowledging that it is there, even if that's all you do? It's something to see it, right? And I think that also changes the way that you're either then able to move through it, or maybe it's not time yet to move through that anger, but at least you've kind of like, you're like, okay, I've seen you, I'll check back in with you, and I can actually handle you. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of, I don't know. It's a hard one. That's kind of, that would be the ideal way. Of course, that is not how I always respond to it. And often my anger is wrapped up in sadness and anxiety, and it makes it so much harder to even see that it's there. So that would be the ideal, is all I'll say to that. But it's definitely hard to do. I think talking about it though is really helpful for people it's okay. Anger is there for everyone. Like, it's okay. It's important to see.
So essentially anything else other than ignore it, right? And like pretending that it doesn't exist. Anything healthy. Let's be clear about that.
We're not judging.
True. Maybe. I don't want the rage coming towards me. So, be healthy in that. We have a time for, I think, a few more questions. So folks in the audience, if you have more, please get them in the chat now. We have about 10 more minutes. So here's a question from Emily that says, thinking of what you learned while being with others in their anger, how can we use this outside of facilitated spaces?
Create more facilitated spaces. I don't know. I think it's really important that it's intentional, and in order to make things happen intentionally, it's really helpful to intentionally make that space, whether that's a curated space for yourself or a curated space with other people. But I also know and also curated space, like if you get your anger out physically by doing sports, like that's also kind of in itself a curated space. So I think everyone deals with this emotion differently. And I just think the curated space with like the way that we did it is I'm glad we did it in the sense that we could just see other people and say that I see you and support in that way. And I think that is, I don't know, really impactful.
I think when the world sees anger in like real life, like outside of these facilitated spaces, well, checking in, like, what do you feel when you see that this person is angry? Like, what is your own internal dissonance or like whatever feeling, like just witnessing your own things about it. And then I think it was really well said that Korea might have said, like, I see you, and even going to the angry person, I see you are angry, how can I support you? Or just letting the person be angry. So much in like community, when anger pops up, it becomes like, be quiet, like don't do that, don't do that. And just being like, I'm going to like let this person be angry. I'm not going to interfere. I'm going to hear it. As long as this, then this is where the like safety things, is anyone in immediate danger, and like making sure that space is set, and like holding the space. And just getting in good karma with like, how can you express your anger? Or even like when you're angry with the people around you, just saying, I am angry. How do we invite that sentence into our relationships, into those kind of spaces of like, I know anger in both like these subtle parts of my relationships, and then in community when I see people are angry.
Yeah, and if I could just go back real quick, basically, I think Talaya, you just said it so great. And I guess what I was trying to say, not to disregard the question at all, but just to say that like you can create that facilitated space just by asking that, right? So just by saying, okay, like given if it's safe, and there is definitely a question of safety, I think we could have a whole different conversation about that. Because I also want to respect those who have been, afflicted by hateful anger. So given it's a safe thing to do, and that you are able to do it, saying, okay, I can hold this space for you, like let yourself be angry in this space. I'm not going to take it personally. Do not direct it towards me, right? That's just being able to create different moments of facilitation, I think is helpful.
Shammai, did you have something?
Yeah, I think that like this is kind of like a train of thought that could be leaving the station, but I think that like I kind of spend time thinking about like what it means to gather, and what are the expectations for how we gather with people. And I think that there is this always overlying like expectation that things will be positive and fun. It's like you go and you hang out with your friends. The expectation is we're going to do this thing. It will be a good time, right? And so I think that like in some ways to facilitate spaces where anger can be present, or honestly any other emotion, is to allow yourself to be open to gatherings or creating community or being with other people that doesn't have to always be positive and fun. I think that like the better friends that I have in this world, or the better connections that I've ever made with people, are always because the expectation going into seeing them or being with them is not that they have to be positive, and that like I do get to express myself in the way that feels right in that moment. And so I think that being open to the expression of others, and not having the expectations follow you everywhere, I think.
That's beautiful. So we do need to wrap up. So I'm gonna wrap this last like question into like a question sandwich, and you just answer whatever it is that you want. So we've talked at length about how this project went beyond just inviting folks to dialogue around race and police brutality. And, we talked about generational trauma and all the other areas, and kind of what's behind rage. So thinking of all of that, and few things before we end. What do you hope folks who come to experience the exhibit, what do you hope they take away from that experience, one? And then two, how do you want to carry your anger differently after this experience? And then we'll end with y'all telling us whatever any other projects you have and what's coming up for They Rage. So.
Going into the exhibition, I think kind of mirroring what I said earlier of just hoping that people go in with an open mind, and allow whatever impacts you to impact you without judgment. I think Lex, it sounded like you did that pretty well, and without judgment, but maybe some curiosity would be my hope, and underlying respect throughout the whole thing. And then how I wish to relate to anger differently. I think I would like to be more honest with it and actually make time for it in the way that we've been talking. So really allow it to have space, and look at it as it's empowering more than like taking energy away.
I want to honor that there's a lot of labor from like holding the space to like being with the pictures. That is a whole lot of labor, regardless of how much passion and love for the child. I'm kidding. I think one thing I want people to take away from looking, I don't know if I could have stakes in like what people feel, but I think one thing that I realize the most when I look at the big wall is that it's so sacred, that anger is sacred and deserves sacred space and like sacred love and compassion.
I think that for viewing the project and kind of answering the question of tools to carry anger differently is like kind of like having a different lens for it, I think is the biggest thing. And what comes to mind is like boiling it down to energy. I think you two both stated that. And like energy just as a force in general. And so hold space for that, you know, in viewing the show, but then also for as a tool for later. I think, what does that propel you to do? What does that you know, cause you to learn? You know, what choices does it influence? I think that seeing it and validating it in both the space and your life, which is something that I think I have to work on more for the personal, but yeah.
I know we're at time, but I do want to honor you all and ask, is there anything left unsaid that's burning in you that you want us to know, that you want to share with us? And then if not, if you can tell us any upcoming projects for They Rage or any participants who would like to possibly work with y'all in the future.
I think not a burning question, but burning statement is just overall gratitude for, one, y'all for participating in this panel with us, and two, for everyone who, you know, did the process and allowed us to be a witness to the release of their rage. And for everyone who's come to the show, I think for Summer and I that this is like a very cool experience, and one that helps us feel valid in what we're doing as well. So thank you to everyone. I think that yeah. So.
Yeah, in terms of updates, we don't have our next sessions lined up yet, but we will keep updates on either the website or Instagram. So for Instagram, the handle is @theyrage, and then the website is theyrage.wordpress.com. And there you'll also find some written interviews and some earlier photos as well, if you're interested in looking at the larger project just outside of Matter is Minimum. And Talaya, is there anything that you would also like to bring up that you're doing?
I'm resting. I'm resting for the next couple of weeks. So you can follow me on Instagram at Sunlight Courts, but I'm not doing anything intentionally to restore the dream space and do some internal communications. And infinitely gratitude to the whole journey of journeying from last August 2020 to August 2021. I'm so proud of you all and all of the things that are happening. And I'm so thankful. So that's about it.
Ashe, thank you all so much. One, for allowing me to join you in this moment. It's a huge honor. Thank you for the work that you've done, for your exhibit, and what you are bringing to us and allowing us to witness. Folks, we are at our time. Thank you so much for joining us. You absolutely need to go see the They Rage exhibit. It is at Union Hall until August 28th. If you are thinking about going, I promise you that is Spirit telling you to go. Just listen, be obedient, and go. Thank you so much for joining us. Shout out to our panelists, shout out to our sponsors, shout out to Union Hall. Excited. Hopefully I can join y'all somewhere else. Peace.
Yeah. Thank you, Lex. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. That was awesome.
That was super good.
Do we leave?
I don't know. I'm stoked.
Yes. Yes. Y'all did great. Okay, everyone, have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Yeah.